This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
We are at pretty critical junctures right now for both the NBA and the NHL. In the NBA, we've got scoring binges with guys going for 60, 70, seeming like every single night. In the NHL, it's the final night before the All-Star break as well. So who better to break down thoughts on both of those sports than Tom Vecchio? We're going to talk to Tom about NBA for tonight, talk about that weird scoring output we've seen recently, and break down his favorite bets across the NHL for tonight as well. This is Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research. Joined here as mentioned by Tom Vecchio. Check him out on Twitter at Tom_Vecchio1. He, of course, is a writer for us here at FanDuel Research, the host of the Daily ISO as well, and Primetime Tom. Tom, happy Wednesday to you. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. Yeah, really interesting time. All-Star break for the NHL, trade deadline, All-Star break for the NBA coming up. We're seeing a lot of unique and milestone games from some players, but I do think there is something actionable out of that.
Oh. A little tease from Tom about what we'll be discussing later on. We're going to dig into Tom and see what that theory may be about why scoring is up there. We'll break down thoughts on the NHL slate for tonight as well to get you ready for your Wednesday night. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. Had John Rothstein on yesterday breaking down his thoughts on the college basketball landscape, who he thinks is the number one team. It is not the current favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook to win the national title. Got some conference thoughts as well out of John. Find that in the Covering the Spread podcast feed on FanDuel's YouTube page and over on FanDuel TV Plus as well, along with my thoughts on Super Bowl 58. Talked about a money line there and a total that I like for Chiefs versus 49ers. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some bets. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers, join today. You'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit FanDuel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, and Vermont. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 in Arizona, 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut, 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana, 1-800-522-4700. Visit ksgamblinghealth.com in Kansas, 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana. Visit mdgamblinghealth.org in Maryland, 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia, 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Let's begin things by talking about those wild games we have seen here recently across the NBA. Devin Booker is in action for tonight, so very relevant for one of the national TV games. Huge single game outputs in the NBA from individuals. Is there some sort of trend that's actionable for betting here, or is it just variance where we've seen all these guys group them together and it happened to be in a 1 week span?
Well, the variance that it all happened within a few days of each other is just, it is what it is. However, when we actually dig into it, I do think we can find some trends that all these players are similar. So the players would be, Embiid going for 70 plus, Luka going for 70 plus, Booker going for 40, 50, 60, and Karl-Anthony Towns going for 60 plus. So the first three players, Booker, Luka, Embiid, all of them are in the top 6 of the league when it comes to total field goal attempts per game. Or I should say, an average per game. All these players are also shooting the ball very effectively. 48% for Luka, 53% for Embiid, and 50% for Booker. So they're high volume shooters. and they're also very effective. They also take plenty of free throws, especially like someone like Embiid. Now, we could dig into each player and say, go to like every detailed usage rate per 36 minutes, which we don't have to do. But like the point is, they're all very high volume shooters and they're also very effective at it. So if we're looking at players to like reach for this ceiling, like what do they realistically need to do? They need to be the primary shot taker on their team. And when we try and equate that to like, how do we make this actionable? The example tonight is obviously, as you said, Devin Booker in action in one of these primetime games. His points prop is at 30.5 minus 113. So it's where it should be. That's where, and I'm not saying this is one of my bets for tonight. I'm just using an example. So when we're looking at him, okay, he's going off these 40, 50-point scoring. This is what he's been doing his whole career, dating back to 2017 when he went for 70 points against Boston. And, you look for 35-plus points on his alt market, and it's at plus 190 now, and 40-plus points is at plus 500. So these are obviously huge outcomes. But this is within his, like, range of outcomes. Like, if you look at a bell curve of his point production per night, like, obviously these are on the higher end, but it's not like they are outliers. They are viable outcomes. So, like, the example or the kind of a comparison I would use is like a wide receiver in the NFL. If his yardage total is at 78, 79, 80, realistically, that means he's like one or two, probably number one on the team when it comes to target share. He probably has a high air yard share, high ADOT, like all these things. So if you woke up one morning and saw him go for 100 plus yards, you're not surprised at all. 8 catches, 100 yards. You're like, okay, that's his normal thing. So if we use the underlying metrics of players that are high usage, high volume shooters, good effective, efficiency from the field, that indicates us to a spot that's saying they should be taking these shots. They can reach for 40. Now, I will add the caveat, you can't have just being super effective. Like some players like Nick Claxton on the Nets or Jared Allen, who I've spoken about before in the Cavaliers, they're centers, so they're shooting the ball like 60+% from the field, but they're only taking 11 field goal attempts a game, 10 field goal attempts. So it's not just one or the other. It has to be high usage, high volume, and effective overall.
So you're looking for the combination of both and looking into alt markets and taking advantage of volatility in the positive sense. I know the word volatility has a negative connotation, but for betting, it's good if you can look into alt markets and try to find some value there. Now, Booker, as you alluded to, currently 5-1 to go for 40 plus. He has done that 5 times this year out of, I think, 38 games. It's a 13% clip. Implied odds there are 16%. The Nets, still pretty good defense, right?
Generally? They're okay. They've been a bit up and down as of late.
Yeah. So like you have to take these things in consideration, but 16% is not that far off of 13%. So if you think it's a good environment, if you think that he'll be, for whatever reason, inclined to shoot a bit more and be more effective, it makes sense why you'd at least give consideration to alt markets, even though that is a very high number.
Right. And, part of that, part of the problem is in like some of these outcomes, especially for someone like Embiid, who I've talked about before, where his points prop is going to be like 36, 37.5. And some of these games, like when they play Washington or they play Detroit or Charlotte, because they're in the East, they have to play max amount of times. Like there are times Embiid only gets to 34 points and he just doesn't play in the fourth quarter because they're up by 20.
Right.
So while he's in a super soft matchup, he just doesn't have to be out there for 38 or 40 minutes.
Right.
So taking the overall game into account is also vital, along with their underlying metrics of efficiency and usage and whatnot.
Right. So thinking about, do they have the building blocks for a bonanza?
Yes.
Basically asking yourself, do they have those building blocks? If so, look at alt markets. Obviously, ask yourself, is this good value? If not, pass on. It's okay. But if it is good value, there is a path to that. It sounds like we've seen a lot of that here recently across the NBA.
Yes.
Let's dig in now and talk about that Suns and Nets game. That is a national TV game for tonight. Suns and Nets on ABC, followed by Bucks and Trailblazers over on ESPN. What are you seeing for these games as far as value for tonight at FanDuel Sportsbook, Tom?
That would be going to Booker's teammate, Kevin Durant, making his return to Brooklyn against his former team. I am buying into the narrative. Over 25.5 points for Durant. Obviously, there are some, alternate point totals you can take, but I like the 25.5 points. His shot volume is super strong. He's not in the top 10 in the league, but he's, in that top portion. His shot volume actually has been a little bit lower in some of these recent games because Booker has been so good. And so, I'm trying to play a little bit of a narrative, but it does make sense. As a Nets fan, I can tell you that them being like 5-15 over their last 20 games is obviously horrible, whatever it is. So they're struggling. This game has a close 3-point spread. It's a 231 over under, right? 233 over under for this game. 233, 3-point spread. So we have these kind of core elements for a game environment. Durant taking 12 field goal attempts or 15 field goal attempts is below his 19 average. So just because Booker's had some hot games, Durant took a back seat for a few games. Not a big deal. So I'm going to play into the narrative a little bit, but it really does make sense with his overall shot volume, his overall usage, and the matchup. I do think the Nets are struggling on defense. So we over 25.5 points for Durant.
So this is a situation where we haven't seen the Suns with all three of their big three healthy the entire year. It's been more than a month, or about a month now, that we've had all three, with Beal being healthy as well. Does that play into it at all too? Or have we seen enough of a sample here where you're not worried about the fact they have three legitimately very good mouths to feed in this offense, where you can still feel good about Durant putting out the volume you need?
Yeah, it's like sometimes one player just has the hot hand, and that's been Booker. Yeah. So they can all still get there of 20 plus points on a nightly basis. Who goes for 35 is obviously just, pick your poison, which player does it. But, I'm playing into the narrative along with, I think Durant's shot volume has just been far too low.
Okay.
So him getting back to his positive regression to his average per game isn't a surprise, even if this wasn't a revenge spot.
So we need Book to chill out, basically.
Well, yeah. I mean, they could both go for 30.
Sure. Very, very true. Okay, so Tom is on Kevin Durant in the revenge game over 25.5 points, -113 at FanDuel Sportsbook. As mentioned, the other game tonight on national TV is the Bucks and the Blazers. That game on ESPN. Late tip, 10:10 p.m. Eastern for this one. Bucks, 10.5-point favorites. Doc Rivers in town. We talked a bit about the implications of that last week here on the show. Pretty decent spread in this game. What are you seeing for this one, Tom?
Another revenge spot for Damian Lillard going up against his former team. But this one I think makes even more sense, where I spoke about Doc Rivers last week. Like, it's time to trust their veterans. No more messing around with the rotation, coming off a loss in Denver. And Lillard over 3.5 made threes at +136. I think this number is awesome. A player that, look back at his game log, and he takes 9, 10, 11 3-point attempts on a nightly basis. It's a massive spread in this. What do you say? It was 12 points? 10.5
10.5, yeah.
10.5. Why? Because Portland's terrible, right? They don't play good defense. So seeing Portland allow a lot of threes is kind of the calling card this year for anyone going against them, or Washington or Detroit, all these terrible defenses. So Lillard, his shot volume and 3-point efficiency has been lower, or I should say his efficiency has been lower. He's still taking 9, 10 threes per game. Combine that with the fact that I said it's just time for the Bucks to buckle down and trust their key players, which is Antetokounmpo and then Lillard, in that order. You throw in Middleton, you throw in Brook Lopez, and then you go from there. So Lillard taking 10 threes doesn't shock anyone. Getting it at plus money when we know that they should be tightening their rotation in a super soft matchup against Portland, one of the worst teams in the league, all of this lines up.
But I also think it goes back to the volatility discussion we had before. Volatility is your friend in the right situations, and 3-point shots are volatile, or 3-point made attempts are volatile, but you're getting +138 for him to get 3.5 or get more than 3.5. So in that sense, you're benefiting from that volatility because you're getting more upside should it happen to be right. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Lillard is a very good shooter who has not been, lighting it up recently from deep, but there is regression there because we know long-term dude can shoot. Revenge game does not hurt either. So I think it's another spot where different market, but you're still benefiting from the positive sides of volatility here.
Right. I considered his PRA bet, which I think is at 35.5, 36. Because just saying, okay, this is a player that, again, when he shoots for, when he shoots and he gets hot, is a player that can hit 30 plus real points alone.
Right.
But just based on the overall game environment, this is a game where he may not need to have, or he could just hit the 4 threes and have 20 some odd points and then kind of take care of business.
Yeah.
So there are some permutations of how you approach this, but again, going with the upside of that volatility, Lillard with over 3.5 is the way to go.
The PRA bet Tom alluded to, 37.5 right now for Lillard. Over is -102 for him in that revenge game for tonight. Okay, let's take a look at the rest of the NBA slate. Any other bets stand out to you as being good values at FanDuel Sportsbook, Tom?
Yeah, I was going to be on the Magic, and that number was 4.5, but it moved to 5. So I want to actually go to a player prop instead. If you can get 4.5 or 4, whatever it may happen, I would certainly be on with the Magic. I spoke about the Magic a couple weeks ago. They're this team that's great against the spread. Markets haven't caught up to them, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be Paolo Banchero for the Magic, over 36.5 PRA, minus 115. Awesome matchup against San Antonio. San Antonio, top 10 league in offensive pace. Magic playing up in pace. Paolo Banchero leads the Magic with 30.5 offensive usage rate. He is approaching superstar level. As I've said, I think that he's ready to take the next step. Not this year fully, but it's going to be next year when he takes that next step, and he's going to be averaging a double-double on a nightly basis. High volume shooter, easy matchup, pace up spot. And again, I'm buying into the Magic this season as being a very strong team. And if they're going to be covering the spread, it's going to be Paolo Banchero 1, and then probably Franz Wagner number 2 as the reason as why they're coming away with the win.
And the market is buying the Magic, as you mentioned, going from 4.5 to 5. Banchero is now minus 120 to go over 36.5 PRA. The implied odds there, 54.5% versus a minus 115, 53.5%. So up a tick, up a percentage point. How high would you be willing to go with this number? Minus 125, the back out zone. If it goes up to 37.5, are you out then? What are you feeling as far as potential movement on this one?
Not 37.5.
Okay.
But minus 125 is fine.
Okay. So keep an eye on the...
It's thin.
Okay. So keep an eye on the Banchero PRA number right now. Over 36.5 is minus 120, but Tom likes that. In addition to Damian Lillard over 3.5 made threes at plus 138, and Paolo and KD over 25.5 points, which is minus 113.
Correct.
Let's talk about the NHL tonight, Tom. And this is the final slate for them before the All-Star break. And when it comes to the NBA, I get very nervous about betting things when it's right for the All-Star break because we can see guys get some additional rest. Is that a concern in the NHL, or is it pretty much all systems go on that side?
For the most part, it's pretty standard. The only times players don't see normal minutes is in a blowout in either direction, where, like a top line center and wingers, they see 21, 22-ish minutes game, 20, somewhere around there. In a blowout in either direction, if their team's up 5-1 in the third, those numbers, sometimes you see them at like 17 minutes just because they roll the third and the fourth line more. So it's super situational. I will say between last night's games, both underdogs coming away with wins. For Seattle was minus 250 last night, and they got shut out and lost. We're seeing some lack of energy games. Okay, so the teams are still operating normally. It's just like, it seems like almost early season games where it's just like they're kind of just going through the motions. So that's the one caveat I would note.
Okay. So be a bit more wary when it comes to that. And I think the energy thing might be reflected in the totals for tonight, because 3 games on the slate, 2 of them have totals of 5.5, heavily juiced towards the over. So, keep that in mind as well. But let's start things off here by talking Kings versus Predators. Pretty even matchup here. Money line for the Kings, minus 115. Predators, minus 104. This game is on TNT tonight. Any bets you like in that one specifically, Tom?
Only one, and that's going to be with Philip Forsberg for the Predators. Over 3.5 shots, minus 130, and 5+ shots at plus 172. The Kings are a team I spoke about earlier in the season, and I said that they are a Stanley Cup contender, and I said that they were doing everything right. Super deep down the middle at the center position, which is very important in the playoffs. They play great defense. They play great goaltending. And over the past month, literally everything has flipped to the other side where they look terrible. So they cannot wait for the All-Star break because things could not be going worse for them. I like Forsberg because this is a clear bounce back spot for the Predators against a team that is absolutely struggling right now. Forsberg is tied for 6th in the league for the most shots on goal. He's averaging 3.9 per game. So yeah, there's a little bit of juice on his normal over 3.5. But when we look back at his game log and we're seeing 9, 5, 6, 5, 5, 5 shots on goal, the 5+ at plus 172, when we're seeing it 5 or 6 times in the last 10 games, now going up against a struggling team, really does make sense. I will also say his goal odds are at plus 140, if I remember correctly. He only has 1 goal over his last 5 games, and he's shooting at this immense high volume, top 6 in the league. So 140 is accurate. If you can get it at 150, that's a buy-in spot. It's just too low right now.
Okay. Now I want to ask you about your process here when it comes to laddering shot props, because I think about this in the same way I think about like money lines for underdogs in the NFL. If I show value on both, I will bet both. I take my typical bet size and I allocate typically about 70% to the spread, 30% to the money line to give myself more upside. How do you do that when it comes to, obviously it changes based on the market and stuff like that, but what percentage of your typical bet size are you putting towards the traditional market versus the alt market to get that upside?
It depends on matchup, but like tonight, for example, with Forsberg, I wouldn't mind, like personally, I wouldn't mind putting on like 2 units on over 3.5, just because I feel very, very strongly about that. 5+, 6+, as you ladder it up, the 5+ is probably just gonna be like a half unit play for me. Okay. Where I love the odds on it at +172. I love his probability to actually hit it, which is averaging 3.9 per game, especially over a recent stretch now going up against a very struggling team in the Kings. 5+ is well within his range of outcomes. When you see again up to 9, that's obviously insane, and we're not going to be banking on that on a nightly basis. So I would go heavy on the 3.5, 2 units, and then 5+ is probably a half unit play for me tonight. Okay, perfect. So majority of it goes on the traditional market, but then a little bit more upside just in case Forsberg does have one of those 9-shot nights. So 5+ shots for Forsberg, +172, and then the over 3.5 is -130 right now at FanDuel Sportsbook. 2 other games across the NHL for tonight. Where are you seeing value there, Tom? Unfortunately, that's with the Sharks and the Ducks, 2 of the worst teams in the league. The Sharks are the actual worst team in the league. They happen to be on the second night of a back-to-back. By no means do I think the Ducks are a good team. They are better than the Sharks, but they're by no means a good team. Sharks are dead last in the league this season for the most shot attempts allowed per 60 minutes in 5v5 situations. The Sharks also had to travel. So the Ducks have been sitting at home. There's no reason they should be losing this game, but I'm not willing to bet on them because they're not a good team. So I would just simply go to Troy Terry for a shot prop, over 2.5, -132. He leads the team in shots over the last 10 games. He's a very good goal scorer. He's having a very clear down year in terms of shot variance and shot percentage. Very slow starts the season for him. He's been picking the goals up as of late. Goals are highly variable. They're also a terrible team, so them actually getting consistent shots or consistent scoring chances, I should say, is not something I'm willing to bank on. But the shots are for Troy Terry. So over 2.5, very simple, -132. There's a little bit of juice there. I would not ladder this player. There's a completely different, way to go about it. But -132, I think, is fine juice against the worst team in the league.
Okay, that is for Troy Terry in the Sharks versus Ducks matchup. Over 2.5 shots, -132 at FanDuel Sportsbook. That's in addition to the Philip Forsberg over 3.5 shots, -130, and Forsberg to get 5+ shots, which is +172. That is Tom Vecchio. Check him out on Twitter at Tom_Vecchio1. Find him over on the Daily ISO today, not the next couple of days, because Tom is on vacation. Tom, enjoy the time off, and we'll talk to you once again next week.
Thanks for having me. See you then.
Alrighty, find Tom on Twitter at Tom_Vecchio1. I am on Twitter at Jim Sonis. You can find me on Threads at Jim.Sonis and find FanDuel Research on Twitter at FanDuel Research. Tomorrow we're talking EPL with Austin Cass, and I'll be talking NASCAR with the Busch Light Clash out at the LA Coliseum. We'll talk to all of you then. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.